My father died believing my mother was a saint. He died holding her hand, breathing his last breath in a room paid for by my sweat, my tears, and every single dollar I had saved since I was 18 years old. He looked me in the eyes, squeezed my fingers, and whispered, "Take care of your mother, Leo. She gave up everything for us." I swore to him on his deathbed that I would. Exactly 48 hours later, at his wake, while my father's body was sitting in a polished mahogany casket at the front of the church, my mother's phone buzzed on the pew between us. She was in the bathroom. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was a text from her lawyer. 5 words. "The offshore account cleared. He's gone." I unlocked her phone. I shouldn't have, but my gut told me something was deeply wrong. Within 30 seconds, I realized 3 things that shattered my entire existence. First, my father didn't die of natural illness. He died bankrupt because someone had been quietly draining his medical fund for 6 years. Second, my mother hadn't spent a single night crying over my dad. She had spent those nights preparing to move to Spain with another man. And third, the man she was moving away with was my father's biological brother. They thought they had pulled off the ultimate crime. They thought my father took their secret to his grave. They were wrong, because I didn't cry at that funeral. I didn't break down. I just put the phone back in her purse, leaned over my father's casket, and made him a brand new promise. I was going to take everything from them. Drop a comment right now. If you caught a family member committing the ultimate betrayal, would you expose them instantly, or would you play the long game? Let's get into the story. My name is Leo. To understand how deep this knife cut, you need to understand who my family was, or at least, who I thought they were. Growing up, my parents were the golden couple of our neighborhood. My father, Arthur, was a quiet, hard-working man. He owned a small regional auto parts business. He wasn't rich, but he worked 16-hour days to make sure we had a home. My mother, Helen, was a pristine, elegant woman. She ran a boutique event planning agency. Everyone adored her. Then there was my uncle Richard, my dad's younger brother. Richard was everything my father wasn't. Loud, charismatic, flashy, and constantly launching failed business ventures. Every time Richard got into debt, my dad bailed him out. That's just what family did. Arthur loved his brother unconditionally. 6 years ago, my father collapsed in his workshop. The diagnosis was brutal, an aggressive neurodegenerative condition. It required specialized round-the-clock care, expensive experimental treatments, and constant supervision. At 22, my life hit a brick wall. I sacrificed everything. I dropped out of my final year of university. I moved back into my parents' house. I took a grueling job as a night shift logistics coordinator and spent my days taking care of my dad. My mother wept every single day. She held my hand and said, "Leo, we're burning through our savings. I don't know how we're going to survive this." So I did what any dutiful son would do. I signed over my inheritance trust, a modest fund my grandfather had left me. Over 6 years, I personally funneled over $300,000 into what I believed was my father's medical trust account. My mother handled the finances. She said it was too painful for me to manage the bills while caring for him. I trusted her. She was my mother. Why would I ever doubt her? My dad fought hard for 6 years. But 3 weeks ago, his heart gave out. The entire community rallied around my mother. They brought flowers, cooked casseroles, and praised Helen for being such a heroic wife. Uncle Richard was right there beside her at the funeral home, patting her back, wiping away her tears, comforting her like a loving brother-in-law. It was sickening. Because I saw the way Richard's hand lingered on her lower back when they thought no one was watching. That brings us back to the moment at the wake. When I unlocked my mother's phone in that church pew, I didn't just find one text. I found a hidden vault app disguised as a calculator. The passcode? My dad's date of birth. The sick irony of it made my skin crawl. Inside that app was 6 years' worth of encrypted messages, bank statements, and plane tickets. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My father's condition had required expensive medicine. Yes, but not $300,000 worth. For 6 years, my mother and Uncle Richard had been systematic thieves. They weren't just having an affair. They were liquidating my father's business and funneling my hard-earned money into a private Swiss bank account registered to a shell company in Panama. My dad didn't die broke because of his illness. He died broke because the 2 people he loved most were starving his estate to fund their lavish future together. They had bought a luxury villa in Marbella, Spain. The flight was scheduled for 4 weeks after the funeral. They were planning to leave quietly, sell the family home, and disappear under the guise of Helen needing a fresh start after her tragic loss. I sat in that church row, staring at my mother's phone, feeling my heart turn to solid ice. My mother walked back from the restroom, smoothing down her black dress. She sat next to me, patted my knee gently, and whispered, "Are you okay, sweetheart? You look pale." I looked her dead in the eye, forced a soft smile, and said, "I'm fine, Mom, just thinking about the future." That night, after the guests left, I went down to my dad's old workshop in the basement. I pulled up a chair and sat in the dark for 3 hours. I had 2 choices. Option A, call the police, present the phone data, and trigger a long, messy legal battle, where high-priced lawyers would likely stall the case and let them flee the country. Option B, destroy them completely. Option B was the only choice. I knew how my mother operated. She was obsessed with her social status. She cared more about her reputation in our wealthy suburban community than she did about human life. And Uncle Richard? His god was money and pride. If I just sent them to jail, they would play the victims. I needed to strip them of their money, their dignity, and their freedom, all in one fatal blow. My strategic crescendo began the next morning. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed access to their Panama shell company and their domestic bank transfers. So I reached out to a man named Julian, an independent cyber forensic accountant and a close friend from my time in university. I showed Julian the raw logs I had saved from my mother's phone. Julian looked up at me, horrified. "Leo, this isn't just infidelity. This is grand larceny, tax fraud, and elder financial abuse. If we handle this wrong, they'll notice the digital trail and wire the money out of Panama before we can lock it down." "How long do we have?" I asked. 3 weeks, Julian replied. Before their flight to Spain, the clock was ticking. Phase 1 was isolation. I needed my mother and Uncle Richard to feel completely secure so they wouldn't alter their plans. I played the grieving, submissive son. I told my mother I was tired of managing the remaining household affairs. I officially offered to hand over full power of attorney for my father's remaining business assets to Uncle Richard. When I said those words, I saw the predator instinct flash in Richard's eyes. He tried to hide his smile, coughing into his hand. "Of course, Leo, I'll carry the heavy burden for you. Your father would want me to handle it." They fell right into the trap. By taking control of the business assets, Richard signed legal documents that tied his personal social security number directly to my father's corporate tax filings. Phase 2 was the wire trap. Julian worked endlessly to create a shadow mirror of their Panama account. But 4 days before the execution date, we hit an absolute nightmare obstacle. My mother called me into the kitchen. Her tone was sharp, suspicious. "Leo," she said, holding her tablet, "I got an alert from my bank. Someone tried to access my external transfer history from an unrecognized IP address in town." My pulse skyrocketed. My hands started sweating inside my pockets. "Really?" I acted confused. "Mom, remember last night? I tried to print out Dad's life insurance forms using the home Wi-Fi. The router was acting glitchy. Maybe that's what triggered it." She stared at me. For 5 agonizing seconds, she didn't breathe. She narrowed her eyes, scanning my face for any trace of deceit. "If you're sweating right now, smash that like button. Let's see if she bought it." She slowly sighed, setting the tablet down. "You always were terrible with tech, Leo. Leave the financial stuff to me and Richard." I almost let out a breath of relief. We had survived the near failure, but the window of opportunity was closing. They were moving the flight up. They weren't leaving in 2 weeks anymore. They were leaving in 3 days. We had to launch the trap early. Instead of a quiet legal notice, I decided to give my mother exactly what she loved most: a grand public spectacle. 2 days before their new flight, my mother hosted a celebration of life charity gala at the local country club. It was her crowning social event, a gathering of 200 of the town's most prominent citizens, business leaders, and family friends. She stood at the front of the ballroom, wearing a pristine black designer dress, dabbing her eyes as she spoke into the microphone about her beloved late husband, Arthur. Uncle Richard stood right behind her, looking solemn and distinguished. I stood at the back of the room, next to the AV control booth. Julian gave me a subtle nod from across the room. The signal was green. My mother wrapped up her speech. "Arthur loved this community," she cooed into the microphone. "And to honor his memory, my brother-in-law Richard and I are establishing a perpetual memorial fund." "Actually, Mom," I spoke up, my voice projecting clearly through a lapel mic I had turned on. The entire room turned to look at me. My mother's smile froze. "Leo, sweetheart, what are you doing?" she whispered into her mic, trying to laugh it off. "I have a short tribute video I'd like to play for Dad," I said, walking slowly down the center aisle, just to show everyone where all the money actually went. Before she could react, the massive projector screen behind the stage flickered to life. It didn't show photos of my father. It showed explicit, high-resolution text logs between Helen and Richard, dating back 4 years. It showed bank transaction receipts, side by side, my hard-earned paychecks moving into the medical account, followed immediately by transfer slips to the Panama Villa account under both of their names. And then came the final blow, an audio recording from 3 nights prior. Mother's voice. "Is the money safe, Richard?" Richard's voice. "Every cent. Arthur died without a clue. The idiot son paid for half our house in Marbella." The atmosphere in that ballroom ruptured instantly. People gasped in disgust. Former business partners stood up in shock. My mother's face went from pale to ghostly white. She dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the wooden stage floor. Uncle Richard lunged toward the AV booth to cut the power, but 2 off-duty police officers, whom I had personally hired as event security and briefed beforehand, stepped into his path and slammed him against the wall. "Leo, stop this! You're ruining everything!" My mother screamed, her pristine facade shattering into ugly, desperate rage. She stumbled off the stage, reaching for me. "I am your mother. You were his wife," I said, my voice dead cold, "and you let him die thinking he was a burden." My mother thought the public humiliation was the worst part of my revenge. She was wrong. As the federal marshals stepped into the room, having been alerted by Julian's team regarding the Fulstra international tax fraud and wire fraud tied to the corporate papers Richard had signed, my mother grabbed my arm, weeping hysterical tears. "Leo, please, tell them it's a mistake. They'll take everything. The money in Panama." I leaned down and whispered in her ear, "There is no money in Panama, Mom." She froze. "What?" Here is the final twist. When Julian breached their shell company 48 hours before the event, we didn't just document the theft. Using the power of attorney documents Richard had arrogantly signed, Julian legally rerouted the Panama account back into a trust fund created under my father's original business name. Every single dollar they had stolen over 6 years, plus Richard's entire personal retirement savings, which he had commingled into the shell account to avoid taxes, was automatically transferred into a registered charity for neurodegenerative research in my father's name. They weren't just going to prison. They were going to prison penniless. My mother looked at me with a horror far deeper than fear of the law. She realized that for 6 years, she thought she was playing a slow game of chess against my naive father, only to realize she was playing against me. As the officers cuffed Richard and led my sobbing mother out through the front doors of the country club in front of 200 people filming on their phones, I stood alone in the center of the ballroom. It's been 6 months since that night. Uncle Richard was sentenced to 8 years for corporate embezzlement and tax evasion. My mother accepted a plea deal for conspiracy and grand larceny. She's currently serving 4 years in a federal facility. The family home was sold. The proceeds, along with the recovered funds, built a dedicated research wing at the hospital where my dad spent his final days. There's a plaque on the wall with his name on it. People ask me if I feel victorious, if revenge gave me peace. The honest answer? It didn't bring my father back. It didn't erase the 6 years of sweat, exhaustion, and betrayed trust. I live alone now in a small apartment 2 hours away. I don't visit my mother. I don't take her collect calls. Revenge doesn't heal a wound. It just cauterizes it so you don't bleed to death. I learned that blood doesn't make someone family. Loyalty does. My father died with a pure heart, believing he was loved, and my mother will spend the rest of her life in a cold cell, knowing that the son she tried to manipulate was the one who pulled the trigger on her fake life. Take care of the people who love you, and never ever confuse someone's silence for weakness. Thanks for listening. If this story made your blood boil, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, and check out the next story on screen right now. I'll see you in the next one.